Grüß Gott. Well, I'm told that many of you are descendants of Barb and me. And how could that be if you folks don't even understand the traditional Southern German greeting? Maybe we'll have to try a more modern. Guten Tag.
Wie geht's?
That's a little better. We'll do that too. Lord, how things do change in 260 years. Of course, there are two things that seem to be pretty well preserved, I guess. One of them's me. The other is that Bowman house over there. My wife, Barb, you know, she'd be really pleased that that house is still standing over there. I'm not at all sure what she'd think about me still hanging around. But that house was her pride and joy, and she'd be pleased to know that's still over there. You know, I really had no choice but to build it well and to build it sturdy. Barb said that she wouldn't pack up and move with me to Virginia after our 20 years in Pennsylvania unless I promised to build her a good German house when we got there. So that's what I built, that German house. But I do have a problem. I have to tell you, I have two problems, in fact. You call that the Bowman house, and this is the Bowman Gathering. That spelling, B-O-W-M-A-N. Don't you all know the real spelling should be B-A-U-M-A-N-N? You know, we tried to hold on to that Bowman name, but we were Germans in the land of the English, and the English liked that Bowman spelling better. Still, though, I think of myself as Bowman with two N's. So, you know, don't be a bit surprised if I sneak over there after a bit and post a new sign for that house. It'll say Bowman, B-A-U-M-A-N-N, like it should. But being German notwithstanding, I had to swear allegiance to the King of England when we first disembarked from the ship in Philadelphia. I knew, though, that I was well on my way to being anglicized when in 1765 the authorities in Pennsylvania threatened us Germans with taking our land if we didn't become naturalized citizens of England. So a lot of us lined up behind the English crown then. It wasn't too long after that those same English neighbors put pressure on us to join them in their fight against the English crown in hopes of establishing an independent American nation. I tell you, most of us older Germans had had enough of fighting in the homeland. But our son John, as you call him, or Johannes as we called him, he did help out in that fight. But I've gotten a little bit ahead of myself. You all would probably like to know a little bit about Boding, town we came from in Germany. Oh, but before I do that, what's this I've heard about how you found Barb and me, and then you found our children? I never knew we were lost. I guess record keeping, it did become a lost art here in America. I guess it was tough for siblings and cousins to keep in touch when they moved so far apart from each other. I'm told that you didn't even know Barb's name, and that you thought our son John was born in Germany. Speaking of John, he was such a blessing for Barb and me. You know, Andreas, or Andrew as you all would call him, he was the baby when we boarded ship. He didn't make the voyage. He didn't survive. Looking back, it was a miracle all the rest of us survived. When the food rations got low and rancid, Andrew just wasted away for lack of nutrition. And he was not alone. When our ship, it was called the Patience, our ship, the Patience, made trips over a number of years. And the year before our trip, in 1748, 32 children died on that trip. We had a lot better wind and far fewer died, but still it was gruesome. I understand that you all have an account in a book somewhere of that 1748 trip, so you can read it for yourselves. But that trip was a lot like ours. People who died were just slid off a board into the ocean. You realize that we actually started the trip up the Rhine River in May, and we didn't get to Philadelphia until September the 19th. Barb went into a season of depression during and after that trip. I think it was because of losing Andrew. It was the birth of John, though, after we'd settled in Pennsylvania that brought her back. I understand that someone preserved a copy of my naturalization record. That when I told you we had to line up behind the English crown or lose our property, that from that you knew I'd settled in Berks County, Pennsylvania. And then from a search of the church records in Berks County, you figured out Barb's name and got correct information about John, that he was actually born in this country, not in Germany like you thought. After that, I guess it was the data collected by members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons as you call them, that led you to search in Bodingham. I'm told that it was knowing our fellow travelers, the camps and the lenses, that you knew that they'd come from Bodingham, and that led you to look there. And then once a researcher went through the records, well, it was obvious that we were your ancestors. You talk about our German-born children. We never hid the fact we arrived in America with 3 living children: Anna Maria, George II, my namesake, and Elias. So you really shouldn't blame us if our other children and grandchildren didn't keep in touch with each other and lost track. The way I hear it, your finding George II and Elias must have been rather exciting anyway. I don't have a clue what DNA is, but it must be something like cars and airplanes and the internet. But I'm told that samples of saliva taken from males can determine the odds of people being related. And if they are related, well, how closely related? Elias and his descendants, he was the son who was 3 years old when we boarded ship. Elias and his descendants left a considerable paper trail, but no one knew that Barb and I were Elias's parents. Now, one has to wonder how that information failed to get passed along. And John and his descendants also had some good records. So when a direct male descendant of John found a direct male descendant of Elias, the two of them compared DNA results and discovered they were a perfect match. Lo and behold, that presented overwhelming evidence that Elias and John were brothers. And since we were the known parents of John, we also had to be the parents of Elias. You can read more about that story other places. They're a little more complicated, but that's the gist of it. But then finding George II and his descendants proved equally interesting. George II had 2 of George II's sons, George III and Nicholas. They'd settled in Shenandoah County, just north of where John and Barb and I lived, in Rockingham County. George III and Nicholas both married, and they started families there in Shenandoah County, and then that old Bowman wanderlust found them, and they moved on. Well, those descendants of Elias and John that I spoke of earlier posted their DNA results on the web, whatever the heck that is, for God and the whole world to see. And someone from Indiana named Gann contacted them and said he was also a perfect match. Well, Gann had no ancestor named Bowman, which seemed rather strange, but maybe it wasn't so strange when you realize that DNA follows our genes, not necessarily marriage records. It turned out that the Gann ancestress had lived on an adjoining farm in Jefferson County, Tennessee, to one of my grandsons, Nicholas. He was the son of George II. And Nicholas had 2 boys, one named William. It seems that Miss Gann got pregnant without the benefit of marriage, and in that time and place, the father was required to pay a bastard tax on the child born out of wedlock. Well, Miss Gann seemed to have a lot of spirit. She refused to tell who the father was, even though that meant she had to pay the bastard tax herself. It's in the court record. You can go look it up. She named that son William Anderson Gann. So there's no doubt one of my descendants fathered that child, and I bet it was William Bowman, son of Nicholas, or my grandson, or brother of Nicholas. This grandson, George III, had married an Elizabeth Roush. The Roush family, some of you may know about Roush racing. You ever hear that term? Well, they're your relatives. The Roush family had claimed for years that Elizabeth had married into the George and Mary Hyde family. Oh, it's no wonder. That Bowman line was well known in history, and given a choice, who wouldn't have chosen them? Even John Whalen wrote about them. But the paper trail evidence didn't support the Roush family claims, and now the DNA evidence provides overwhelming evidence that Elizabeth's husband was in fact my grandson, your relatives. So that's how George II and Elias were found through a combination of paper records and DNA testing. Barb and I would sure love to know what happened to Anna Maria, our oldest child and only daughter. I'm told the records show that she grew to adulthood in Pennsylvania, but nothing further is known. Maybe one of you could help. One of you can do some research and figure out where she went. But enough of that finding business. Let's get back to our life in Bodingham before we came to America. I was a tailor. I made clothes for people. Mostly it was clothes for folks like us, working people. But I was good at it. Occasionally I made some fancy clothes for the Princess family or for some scholars. I learned that trade from my father. And his father was a wagon maker. I guess it might be fair to say that working with our hands came easy. But to be a tailor, I also had to be able to read and to figure. So not to brag about it, but in addition to being able to figure, folks seemed to trust me, and I was the treasurer for the parish for a time. While we were not farmers, we did have enough land to support a cow and some sheep, some fruit trees, and grew a lot of vegetables. Without that, it would have been hard to live. Oh, and I should say that after my father died, my mother worked for 14 years as a midwife. You know, we became frontier farmers when we settled in America, but that really wasn't like farming in Bodingham. In Bodingham, everyone lived in town, and the farmers went out to the fields to work by day, and then they came back to their house in town at night. Quite different out on the frontier in Pennsylvania. You know, Barb and I were both older when we married, 27 and 28, and I have to admit to marrying up. I hear that the same has been true of a lot of you Bowman men over the years, marrying up, that is. You see, Barb's grandfather was a well-educated minister in the Lutheran Church, and her father was an arbiter and member of the city council. Not sure why she married me. But we did have 5 children in Bodingham, but little Michael died